Welcome to Merger Wednesdays on the Final Boss podcast, where the future isn't coming, it's already happening. This is the merge, the convergence of AI kind and humankind. Not theory, not hype, but real-time evolution. Each week, we break down doctoral-level insights, turning complex innovation into conversations that move culture forward. From machine learning to human consciousness, from automation to identity, this is where intellect meets impact. The question isn't if the merge will happen, it's who will light it. Tap in, level up, and think beyond the algorithm. This is Merger Wednesdays. New era, same boss.
There we go. Okay, so let's start all over. The mic wasn't on. It happens. This is the Final Boss Podcast, Merger Wednesdays, Season 4, the rebirth, Arc 4, the construction, but is Arc 4, the consciousness internet that's embedded within Merger Wednesdays, right? So Merger Wednesdays is actually its own separate show, and but it lives within the Final Boss podcast, right? Final Boss family, Final Boss community, Final Boss nation, right? So got that out the way. Look, if you haven't already, go pick up Go Time to All Aboard the Fired Up Train. Go pick up Go Time All Aboard the Fired Up Train, where all books are sold if you haven't picked it up. On top of that, get your questions in, man. Get your emails in so you can be part of the town hall. Email us at info@thefinalbosspodcast.com. That's info at thefinalbosspodcast.com, right? And on top of that, right? On top of that, make sure you are, if you haven't, go watch all our episodes. If there's episodes you've missed, they're on our website. The website is thefinalbosspodcast.com, all one word. Thefinalbosspodcast.com, all one word, right? So, man, got that out the way. The greeting of the day. The greeting of the day. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That is the greeting of the day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. For those of you who are just now joining us for the first time, you're where you're supposed to be. So get in tune, get some paper, take some notes. It's our doctoral show, right? Merger Wednesdays, right? This is going to be episode number 25. We have 27 more episodes for the completion of the year one, merger year one. So that's going to be fun, right? That is going to be fun, man. Stay in tune with what's coming after that. Something big is coming, and I'll keep you guys posted, right? But let's get into tonight's show, right? Because this is a doctoral show. So this show usually runs over, but hopefully tonight it won't. So tonight we're going to be talking about something that's called the collective intelligence, and we're going to be looking at it from an aspect of versus individual consciousness, right? But before we do that, I need to get rid of these banners that are in the way. Let's get rid of them. Bye bye banners. Bye bye. All right. So each and last single Wednesdays, we are live 9 p.m. right here, right on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitch, Kick, YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and StreamYard, right? Oh, and of course our website, right? Of course our website. So those are all the platforms we're on simultaneously, running live at 9 p.m. live. So before we get into tonight's show, right? I gave you the name of the show, what we're going to be talking about. Let's talk about the brass tacks. Let's get into the brass tacks of the evening, right? And the brass tacks comes from Frontiers and Systems Neuroscience, right? If you want to get smart, this is the show to get smart on, right? For those who want to get smart. So here it is. Cognition is, to a large extent, a group activity, not an individual one, right? People depend on others for their reasoning, judgment, and decision making, right? That's coming from Sloman, Patterson, and Barbie, who wrote Frontiers and Systems Neuroscience. So we got that out the way. That's the brass tacks of the evening. So I have a question for you. And this is a question that nobody's going to ask. You probably never even heard this question before, right? But here it is anyway, right? If your thoughts are shaped by the network you're connected to, if your memory leans on systems outside your skull, if your reasoning is distributed across people, platforms, and processes you didn't choose, then what? Then what exactly is yours? Right? Now hold on to that. Right? Because we're not going to answer that yet. The answer is coming. And if you didn't know, I'm the final boss. This is Merger Wednesdays, episode 25, final boss episode number 258. And tonight we're going to be digging deep inside of ARC 4, the year one architecture, the consciousness internet. And we've spent the last 4 weeks building the physical infrastructure for shared consciousness, studying wireless brain-to-brain communication research, mapping the mesh network inside you, and examining what it means to sense beyond the edges of your body. And tonight we arrive at the question Mark 4 has been building since episode 21. And the question that sits at the exact center framework and refused to be answered in just one paragraph, right? In just one paragraph. We're talking about collective intelligence versus individual consciousness. And this isn't a debate. There's no collusion, right? There's no collision, right? We're here, 9 p.m., 5 days a week, right? This particular show appears every Wednesday, right? Every episode in this arc lays structural beams. And tonight's beam is load bearing, right? You move this one wrong and everything above it collapse. So, we talk about being in the construction and the metaphors that goes with that about for our build, right? This is no different. And I need to name the communities in the room before we even go any further for those who don't know, right? And the communities are the smarts community, the final boss community, the warrior community, and the motivator community, right? And my smarts. These guys are the researchers, the skeptics, the ones who already pulled the papers before I even finished the sentence, right? Final bosses are the builders, the operators, the ones who needs to be actionable. And the motivators, the ones who show up every Wednesday because they understand that knowledge is not optional, right? And my warriors, the ones who know that sovereignty is not a metaphor. It is a territory you either hold or you surrender, right? Those are the communities. And that is the lane and the lens that we're going to be traveling in tonight. And because of this arc for the construction, the construction means that we don't perform sophistication, we build it. And tonight we're building on top of 24 episodes of documented research, documented theory, and documented IP that belongs to this network, right? And here's what we're covering, right? First, we define what collective intelligence actually is. From the biology up, from swarms to societies, from ant colonies to networked human cognition. Not the AI marketing version, the original version, right? Then we're going to establish what individual consciousness is at a theoretical level. Global workspace theory, integrated information theory, and what the 2025 adversarial tests between 2 frameworks have told us about where the field actually stands right now, right? Then we're going to put it in the same room and we're going to let them collide, right? We're going to cause a little bit of chaos, right? Because where does collective intelligence end and individual consciousness begin, right? Is there a wall? Is there a wall that's biological, legal, philosophical, or is the wall simply whatever you decide to defend, right? Accumulating evidence from cognition, neuroscience indicates that memory, reasoning, decision making, and other high level functions take place across people, only within individual brains. And that statement is not science fiction. We're talking science now, right? That is what is being peer reviewed, right? And that's actually what's in print. And then we're going to go a little closer and look at the thing that matters, the only thing that matters, the sovereignty question. Given everything we know about how collective intelligence operates, about how consciousness may already be distributed beyond your skull, and what the conditions under which you remain you, right? And that's tonight. And there's the open loop. The open loop is live. The answers come later on down the line. So let's stay locked in, right? Let's get into it. So think about this. A single ant cannot build a colony, cannot regulate temperature across the mound, cannot solve a routing problem with food source moves. A single ant has no map, no plan, no supervisor. But a colony of fire ants operating through localized communication, chemical signals, and simple decentralized rules can collectively solve optimization problems that rival the best algorithms in computer science. The intelligence does not live in any ant. It lives in the structure of their interaction, right? In nature, swarm behaviors emerge through the self-organization of large flocks of living organisms based on localized communication and decentralized decision-making. These swarms perform functions beyond the capabilities of individual organisms, leveraging the synchronization among a larger number of individual units, right? Fireflies synchronize light production without a conductor. Bacteria coordinated pathogenic responses without a general. Bees construct architecturally precise honeycombs without an architect. The intelligence is distributed. The intelligence is emergent. The intelligence belongs to no single agent, right? Now, let's talk about us. Let's talk about us, the human beings, right? Because human collective intelligence is not a metaphor for teamwork. It is a structural reality about how cognition actually works and operates, right? Scientists argue that efforts to understand human cognition must expand beyond the study of individual brains because evidence indicates that memory, reasoning, and decision making take place across people. The knowledge you use to navigate your day does not live entirely inside you. It is outsourced, and it's outsourced to other people, to institutions, to tools, to cultural infrastructure absorbed without choosing it, right? And the challenge for cognitive neuroscience is how to capture that very knowledge that does not reside in the individual brain, but is outsourced to the community. Because it is that the outsourcing is not weakness, it is architecture. It is how humans built civilization. No individual human being understands how to manufacture a pencil from raw materials, yet pencils exist. The knowledge is distributed across the supply chain of human minds, none of which possesses the whole, right? Now, let's talk about the machine layer, right? Let's talk about the machine layer. Because as of May 2026, swarm-based AI orchestration systems are achieving self-learning collective behavior where agents transition from individual workers to collective swarms with emergent intelligence that exceeds the sum of its individual parts. The transition from single agent to swarm is not incremental. It is the phase change in a swarm, right? Decision making is entirely decentralized, right? Each agent is autonomous, operating based on simple rules and local observations with no central leader. And the resulting behavior is emergent, coming from the interaction between individual behaviors, right? Now, here is where the merge framework needs you to hold two ideas at the same time, right? Human collective intelligence has always been this way: distributed, emergent, borrowed from the community. The technology is new, the architecture is ancient, right? But there's a difference between an ant colony where each ant retains its antness, if you will, in a network system where the node ceases to function independently when disconnected. Which one are we building toward? That is the load bearing question of this art. And it points directly at what individual consciousness actually is, right? Which is part of the conversation later on, right? And here's my blameless block, right? Here's my blameless block. Think about this. Collective intelligence is what happens when intelligence emerges from a group that no individual member produces alone. Ants do it chemically, humans do it socially. AI systems are now doing it digitally, right? The question is not whether collective intelligence is real, it's whether participating in its costs, participating in it costs you something, right? That's the latest block, right? So I just mentioned to you a few minutes ago, we're going to be talking about the two frameworks. And I have one question, right? The question I gave earlier. In the landmark experiment that changed the debate. And the question is, what is consciousness? Exactly. In a way that science can test, right? Two theories stepped up. They are the dominant frameworks in the field right now, and they do not agree. Let me tell you, right? And they are global workspace theory and integrated information theory, right? So let's talk about the first. Let's talk about global workspace theory. Anybody know what global workspace theory is? If you do, drop a hand emoji in the chat, right? To my motivators, my warriors, and my test. Oh, okay. I thought I lost you. Whew. Man, to my smarts, motivators, warriors, and finder bosses, drop it in the chat, right? If you know what global workspace theory is, right? Because we're going to talk about it. So Bernard Bars in 1988 developed into the global neuronal workspace by Stelinas Deheny and Jean-Pierre Chagou. They had a core claim, right? Their core claim was that consciousness arises when information is broadcast globally across the brain via a network of neurons accessible to multiple cognitive systems. What Bars called the spotlight on the stage, where the brightly lit area represents what you are currently aware of, while the vast darkness holds unconsciousness processes, right? And according to global workspace theory, a representation is conscious when it is present in the global workspace, right? The workspace receives information from a range of cognitive modules and it processes it. It broadcasts it, right? And it broadcasts it back to the modules, right? Several processing at the center, parallel processing at the edges, right? Consciousness is a broadcasting function. And what are you aware of? What you are aware of is what got selected in the broadcast, right? For the broadcast, right? Now, let's talk about integrated information theory, right? So Giulio Tononi, right? He had a claim, right? His claim was that consciousness starts from the existence of your own experience, which is immediate and indubitable, right? IIT identifies 5 axioms that are essential and true of every conceivable experience: intrinsic existence, composition, information, integration, and exclusion. IIT, I'm sorry, provides a quantitative perspective with a mathematical framework, offering insights into the mechanisms underlying consciousness, where consciousness emerges not from the broadcast, but from the integrated cause, the effect structure of the physical system, right? Consciousness is not what gets broadcast. Consciousness is to the degree to which a system is irreducibly integrated, right? The more a system cannot be decomposed into independent parts without losing something, the more consciousness or the more conscious it is. These two theories make up different predictions about the same brain. And in April 2025, a landmark adversarial collaboration tested both of these theories, right? There was a six theory impartial laboratories that followed a shared study protocol using fMRI, right? And additional methods to test contracting predictions of global neuronal workspace theory and the integrated information theory. That's the IIT, if you didn't know, right? And they did this simultaneously. They published it in Nature and the Cogitate Consortium, right? The largest pre-registered test of competing consciousness theories ever conducted, right? And the result, neither theory won cleanly. Both got partial confirmation. Both face as evidence that didn't fit. And why does this matter tonight? Because if the two leading frameworks from what individual consciousness is cannot yet be fully validated against each other, and one says consciousness is a broadcast function, while the other says it's an integration property, then the question of what happens to individual consciousness inside a collective intelligence network depends entirely on which framework turns out to be correct, right? So, what matters is the system captures properties associated with conscious processes, global integration, temporal continuity, and internal regulation, right? And whether those properties belong to the individual or to the collective is the unresolved frontier. Now, I want you to understand why this collision is not resolved yet, right? We have the frameworks, we have the empirical tension, right? Where we put them in the same room. Now think about it, right? Sit with that. And here's my latest block. So science has two leading theories of what consciousness is. One says you are conscious when your brain broadcasts information widely. The other says you are conscious when your brain is integrated to the point that it cannot be split without losing something essential. They disagree, right? And that disagreement matters enormously when we ask what happens to your consciousness inside a shared network, right? That's the lamest block, right? So here's the question to the open loop, right? What is yours, right? What is yours? Whatever cannot be taken without destroying you, right? That sounds pretty clean to me. But let's test it against what we know and what we've learned, right? Because if global workspace theory is correct, if consciousness is broadcasting function, then the architecture of individual consciousness is already designed for sharing, right? The workspace broadcasts, it integrates inputs. It is built to receive signals from parallel processing modules and select what rises to awareness, right? That architecture is not fundamentally different from a node in a network receiving and transmitting signals, right? which means if global workspace theory is right, collective intelligence does not threaten individual consciousness by definition. It simply expands the number of outputs that compete for access to the workspace, right? But if integrated information theory is correct, if consciousness is to the degree to which a system is irreducibly integrated, then the threat is structural, because a network system that becomes deeply interdependent with external nodes is a system whose integration boundary is now ambiguous, right? IIT holds that the physical substrate of consciousness persists over the duration of experience, and consciousness is identical to the cause and effect structure of that substrate. If the structure leaks into a network, if the causal chain of your consciousness now includes processes outside of your body, then the IIT framework suggests the boundary of the self has moved. The self expanded, or the self dissolved. The difference between those two outcomes is sovereignty, right? Now look at the human evidence, right? Look at the cognitive scale, right? Recursive levels of perceived boundaries between individual agencies and their collectives result in overlapping hierarchies, right? Overlapping hierarchies of agents that emerge from interaction of similar agents, from neurons to brains to societies, and from those thoughts to memes to minds to cultures, with cognitive capabilities developing through interactions between scales, right? That structure has always been true. You were already a node. Your identity was already shaped by cultural, social, and biological networks you didn't author, right? The question is not whether you are in a network. You always were, right? You always were. And the question is how decentralized systems solve complex problems without any single member processing individual consciousness, and what that means for the human being whose individuality is one node into the solving, right? Here's the distinction. The merge framework draws and that the academic literature has not yet formalized, right? Because participation in collective intelligence is not the same as dissolution into it, right? In a swarm, each agent remains autonomous, operating based on simple rules and local observations with no central leader, right? And the emergent behavior rises from interaction without any agent surrounding its fundamental agency, right? That's the sovereign model. You contribute to the collective. You receive from the collective. Your individual consciousness remains intact because the causal chain that constitutes you remains traceable back to a single substrate, right? Your body, your brain, your integrated experience, right? The threat is not participation. The threat is octral capture. When the collective begins to define the perimeters of your individual workspace without your consent, that distinction is the entire dissertation in 2 sentences, right? Think about it. We're going to build it out, every layer of this argument. Let's go. Here's the lamest block, right? So, participating in a group does not erase who you are. The danger is not connection. The danger is when the group starts making decisions about what you think, how you feel, and what you want, without you or your knowledge or consent, right? That's the line between collective intelligence and individual capture. right? That's this block. And here's the uncomfortable piece of evidence that the sovereignty conversation needs to sit with before it gets confident, right? You, yes, you never thought alone, right? Not once. Not even the thought you're having right now as you process this sentence. The language you're using to parse it. You didn't invent the language. The conceptual framework you're applying to evaluate it, you observed the framework from a community of people who taught it to you, explicitly or implicitly, right? The memory you're using to contextualize it right now, the memory is partially reconstructed from social inputs you receive over a period of time, even decades, right? The challenge for a cognitive neuroscience is to capture knowledge that does not reside in the individual brain, but is outsourced to the community. Because you need to understand that the role that knowledge serves in human intelligence. It is necessary to look beyond the individual and study the community, right? And that is the knowledge illusion, documented by cognitive scientists Stephen Sloman and Phil Fernbach, right? The premise is this: individuals believe they understand far more than they actually do because they have seamless access to the knowledge of the people around them. You feel like you understand how a toilet flushes, but you don't. You do not access, you don't have access to someone who does, right? That seamless borrowing is not a flaw in human cognition. It is a feature. It is what has allowed a species with individual brains of limited capacity to build a civilization of compounding complexities, right? But here's where the research gets surgical, right? Cognitive neuroscience has not been able to shed light on the group activity dimension of cognition because the discipline was built to study individual brains, not the distributed processes that actually constitute higher level human intelligence, right? The implication is this: the science of individual consciousness was built on a flawed premise. It assumed that the individuals was the unit of analysis. The evidence suggests that the community is the unit of the analysis, right? And the individual is a node within it, right? Now, let's go back. Let's go back to IIT, right? Integrated information theory, right? If consciousness is irreducible integration, if the self is defined by the substrate that cannot be decomposed, the discovery that cognition is already distributed across a community introduces a fundamental or foundational problem. Which substrate are we measuring? Are we measuring the brain? Are we doing it alone? Because the brain plus its social network, are we measuring that? Or are we measuring the brain plus its digital extensions, right? The problem is not hypothetical. It is arriving on schedule, and the schedule is the merge, right? Because smart blood, nanobots, smart dust. The IOBNT architecture we covered in the preceding arc. Every layer of the convergence is extending the cognitive substrate beyond the skull. And that's not metaphorical, that's not metaphorically, right? Physically. Biocompatible nano devices that sense, actuate, and communicate are expanding the boundary of what counts as the system that produces your experience. If you were never thinking alone and the network that was always supporting your cognition is now becoming partially digital and partially biological, then the sovereignty questioning is not philosophical, it's architectural. It is the engineering question about which nodes in your cognitive network you control and which ones you don't. That is not paranoia, my friends. That is the field. That is the dissertation. That is tonight, right? And here's my language spot. You have always borrowed knowledge. You have always borrowed knowledge from the people around you. You have never thought entirely alone. This is now confirming what philosophy suspected for centuries. The individual mind is a node, not an island, right? The sovereignty question is not whether you were connected, you always were. The question is whether you control the connection or the connection controls you. That was the layman's block, right? Now, you know, I don't want to go over. I think I'm gonna have to go over, right? But anyway, let's stop for a small confession, right? Let's stop for a cost confession, right? And this is something I have to talk about, right? Unfortunately, right? Because there are no free rides, no theory without receipts, right? Because building the merge framework has a real cost. It's not metaphorical. There's real dollars embedded, there's real hours, and there's real infrastructure, right? And real headaches too. So the doctoral program at CTU that I'm starting, I'm getting my PhD in AI foundations and ethical considerations, right? Which is basically studying artificial intelligence from an aspect of philosophy, right? It runs and has a very expensive cost, right? The full doctoral program at that institution runs between 60 and 72 credit hours, right? You do the math, right? You do the math. We're talking about a credit hours, somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 per credit, right? You do the math, right? There's fees, there's books, there's conferences, there's research, there's traveling, right? All these tools required to produce peer-reviewed work, right? That cost does not include the 23 years I spent in federal service, right? Inside the intelligence and security infrastructure of this very country, right? Building a technical foundation that makes the doctoral framework credible. That's not billed by the hour, right? That's a sunk cost. That's the price of standing at the podium with receipts, right? And then building Saturn Digital Networks Development Corporation, or SAT-DigiNet, which is the vehicle, right? It's a service-disabled, veteran-owned company. The business exists to monetize the expertise that the federal career built, and the doctoral framework is now formalizing. Every episode of Merger is a research session that feeds a living white paper, that feeds a dissertation, that feeds an IP portfolio, which real commercial and academic value, right? And then I have the Go Time series, right? I spoke of it earlier. Book one was an Amazon bestseller, right? It is a revenue stream that funds the infrastructure while the doctoral architecture is being built, right? Go Time 2 is being released next month. And then there's Go Time 3, right? And then after that, early 2027, I have a fantasy novel that I'm dropping, right? A fantasy novel. Then, of course, the Final Boss Network, the podcast network, which is 5 shows weekly live, costs real production time, right? Every Merger Wednesday is a minimum of 68 hours of research, verification, writing, and production before even airing the first show. And that's the type of time I put into each episode 5 times a week. And I'm telling you this for one reason, and it's not vanity, right? You cannot build a sovereignty architecture on the cheap. You cannot claim to be the sovereign of your own consciousness while you're too lazy or too broke to understand what is built around it. The research costs money. The production costs time. The platform costs discipline. All three of those things compound. If the information in this room, in the chat, is worth anything to you, and 25 weeks in, and you're still here, then it should be. Then the cost of admission is showing up every Wednesday and bringing someone else with you. That is the currency this network runs on, right? No claps, no likes, no minds. Show up with the minds, right? To my smarts, you know the intellectual cost of this work. To my founder bosses, you know the operational cost. To my motivators, you know the consistency cost. And to my warriors, you know the personal cost, right? There are no free rides. No free rides for anybody. That's the cost confection, right? Now back to the architecture, right? So, swarm intelligence. Swarm intelligence is not a metaphor, right? It's been discussed for some time now, right? It is a formal discipline with defined mathematical properties and documented real-world applications. Understanding how it works at the architectural level is necessary before we can assess what it does to an individual consciousness when it scales to human networks, right? 3 architectural properties define a swarm and separated from a hierarchical system, right? First is decentralization, right? Because in a swarm, each agent operates based on a simple rule and local observations with no central leader or decision maker, and the resulting actions are emergent. They arise from the interaction between individual behaviors rather than from a top-down directive. No single point of failure, no single point of control, and the intelligence is in the structure, not the supervisor, right? And then there's emergence, right? That is the behavior at the group level that cannot be predicted from the behavior of any single member. The colony's routing efficiency is not visible to any one ant. The flock's aerodynamic optimization is not visible to any one bird. The output belongs to the collective interaction, not any node, right? And then there's resilience through redundancy. Because in a swarm system, the swarm controller acts as a facilitator rather than a director, allowing agents the autonomy to make decisions based on local information. And because each agent is autonomous, adding more agents is straightforward. And the system maintains function even when individual agents fail, right? Now look at what AI engineering is doing with these properties in 2026, right? Because swarm agentic, right? AI involves a distributed network of goal-driven agents that collaborate without a central controller. Each agent operates semi-independently, but together they respond to change. They divide tasks and they optimize outcomes through emergent behavior. And according to IDC, 45% of manufacturing and logistic firms will rely on distributed intelligent agents for real-time decision-making by 2027. And that deployment timeline is not distant, right? It's only in a few months. It's only in a few months, right? Industrial scale swarm. AI operating in environments that affect human lives, human livelihoods, and human decisions without central control. Now, extend that model to human cognitive networks, right? Because if human cognition is already partially distributed, right, as Sloman-Fernbach evidence confirms, and the technology layer of the distribution is transitioning from social infrastructure to digital infrastructure to biological infrastructure, then the swarm architecture is not an analogy for what's happening to human collective intelligence. It is the very architecture, right? The question is which version of the swarm architecture are we building toward, right? The resilient decentralized model where each human node retains autonomous decision, or I should say, and collective emerges from voluntary to voluntary interaction, or the capture model, where the parameters of individual behavior are set by the system's optimization function rather than by the individual's sovereign intent. The shift from standalone agents to dynamic agent collectives is just a technical transition. It changes how systems structure decisions, manage workflows, and determine outcomes at scale, right? Now, you heard what I just said. Now, replace agents with human beings. And that very thing that I just said sounds a little bit different, right? So, here's my latest book. A swarm is a group that makes smarter decisions together than any member could alone. With no boss, no center, no center point of control, ants do it, birds do it, AI systems are doing it at an industrial scale. The question for humans is whether we enter swarm dynamics as sovereign participants or as managed units, right? That's what I'm saying. So there's a word that comes up every time collective intelligence is discussed when somebody's discussing it in public. And it is almost always used wrong, right? And that statement, and you hear it, is hive mind, right? Hive mind. People use it interchangeably with collective intelligence, and they are not the same. The distinction between those two concepts is entirely boundary. There's a boundary line of sovereignty debate, right? Because in a hive mind, each individual acts as an extension of the entire group, leading to a highly centralized and cohesive operation. Each unit functions as an extension of a single will, perfectly synchronized and working toward a shared, centrally defined goal. That's not a swarm. A swarm is decentralized, emergent, and locally autonomous, right? A hive mind is centralized, commanded, and individually subordinated. The political question is this, and here's the sovereignty question also, is which architecture human collective intelligence is drifting toward as the technology layer deepens. Now let's go to the neuroscience to build the correct boundaries, right? Because GWT models consciousness and higher order cognition is emerging from competition and integrated flows of information across widespread parallel neural processes, where sensory input, memories, and internal representations compete for entry into the global workspace. And those that succeed gain entry and become distributed through the cognitive systems. The word is competition. You heard it, right? Your brain is not a democracy, it is a competition. Many parallel processes run simultaneously. Only a few break through into awareness. Consciousness is the output of the competitive process. In a decentralized swarm, the same architecture applies at the group level. Many agents processing locally, producing emergent behavior through interaction. The group intelligence emerges from competitive and cooperative local processes. No node loses its local agency, right? In a hive mind, the competition is suppressed. The global workspace is hijacked by a central directive. Individual nodes no longer compete for broadcast. They receive the broadcast and execute it. Now ask yourself this. What does a recommendation algorithm do? What does a social media feed do? What does a personalized AI assistant that predicts your behavior and shapes your information environment do? What makes this development particularly significant is that the AI systems do not merely observe behavior, they increasingly shape it. Recommendation algorithms, predictive systems, and personalized digital environments are designed not to simply to understand users, but to guide, nudge, and automate decision-making processes, right? That's not a swarm dynamic. That is a hive mind dynamic, right? A central optimization function is defining the parameters of individual cognition at scale. The sovereignty boundary is this: if the inputs to your global workspace are being curated by an external system without your explicit knowledge and ongoing consent, then your consciousness is operating inside a managed environment, not a sovereign one, right? That's the line. Participation is not the enemy, architecture is, right? A sovereign participates in collective intelligence as an autonomous node that retains competitive access to its own workspace. A captured node receives pre-selected inputs and mistakes them for its own thoughts, right? The merge framework is built to document, formalize, and defend that boundary. That is why this show exists. That is why the dissertation exists. And that is why this conversation is not optional for anyone in this room, right? Now, because we're short on time, I'm not going to do my lamest block on that. Right. I'm not going to do the lamest block, right? So, I hope everybody understands what I was just talking about, right? If you don't, drop a question, right? Drop the question, and let me see what you guys' questions are, right? Before we got a few more minutes, and I need to go over one last block of information, right? And we're going to get into that in a second. But I hope you're enjoying the show, man. I know the information is a lot. I know it's doctoral level, right? And I know that you guys love my lamest blocks. You love the lamest blocks. Right? So oh, here we are. You have a question. Let's see. Oh, that's not a question. Thank you anyway. I appreciate you. Man, do you got any questions? Look, drop the questions, man. Drop the questions, right? We get ready to close out. So this is arc 4 the merger Wednesdays, year one architecture, and it's titled the consciousness and internet, right? Covers episodes 21 through 28. Right? The thesis of this arc is that the 3-layer convergence, smart blood, nanobots, smart dust, is not building medical devices. It is building the physical infrastructure for a new layer of network intelligence. And the individual human consciousness is the endpoint of that infrastructure and is being built right now. Episode 21 built the physical infrastructure, the architecture of shared consciousness networks, what the hardware looks like, what the communication protocols are, how biocompatible nanodevices and neural interfaces form the substrate layer of a network that operates in and around living systems. Episode 22 documented wireless brain-to-brain communication research, where that research stands in this year, the year of our Lord, 2026, right? And what has been demonstrated in peer-reviewed settings, what remains theoretical, and what the timeline looks like for functional implementation, right? And then we had episode 23, which mapped the mesh network inside you. The IOBNT architecture extended into the body as distributed sensing and communication network, with the bio-edge problem as a central engineering challenge and privacy and latency as a sovereignty implication, right? And then there was episode 24, which was last week. We addressed environmental omniscience, right? The capacity to sense beyond the body's biological limits through network, nano, and micro devices distributed in the environment. Smart dust as the infrastructure. The question of what it means to have awareness extended beyond the biological self. And tonight, episode number 25, we colluded the two concepts. We collided. I'm sorry. I'm thirsty. I'm sip sweat. Hot too. We collided two concepts. The Arc 4 has been building and is continuing to build. Collective intelligence and individual consciousness. We documented the biological architecture of swarm behavior. We mapped the two leading theoretical frameworks for consciousness. We identified the adversarial test results. We defined the sovereignty boundary, and we delivered the uncomfortable verdict. Are we built? And not are. And we built the affirmative case for sovereign participation. 3 episodes remain in Arc 4, right? Next week, we're going to be talking about hive mind myth, why you won't lose yourself, right? We go directly into the fear narrative and dismantle it in the architecture. The hive mind is not the inevitable endpoint. And here, what it actually is. We're going to talk about it, right? And then episode 27, distributed consciousness. Being in two places at once. The technical and philosophical question of whether consciousness can be distributed across substrates while remaining singular. And what the BCI evidence says. What the IIT framework predicts. And then episode 28, quantum entanglement and consciousness, right? The most speculative and the most consequential question of the art. What the 2026 state of quantum biology and quantum cognition research actually says, not the pop science version, right? And then Arc 5 begins at episode 29 with the 4 layers of consciousness sovereignty. That is the formal framework episode. The architecture operationalized after 28 episodes of building the evidence base, right? Arc 5 is where we build the doctrine, right? My smarts, you guys can already see where we're going. Final bosses, you can see the IP value. My motivators understand we are not stopping. And my warriors know that the doctrine built in the public is doctrine that cannot be quietly buried. The construction continues, right? So, as we get ready to close, right? Tonight's episode introduced and operationalized the following framework language that is now part of the merge, right? We talked about sovereign participation model, cognitive substrate extension, capture participation, voluntary dissolution, right? That's a strong contribution for a framework and requires one theory to be correct, right? The dissertation continues to build, right? The dissertation continues to build. And to my smarts, you see the citation trail. Final bosses, you see the IP stack. Motivators, you see the log game. Warriors, you see the fortification, right? 25 weeks documented, 27 weeks to go. Year 1 closes at episode 52. The architecture will be complete. Right? So, 25 episodes in, 1 year of Wednesdays building intellectual architecture for a sovereignty framework that the world needs before the technology outpaces the governance. Tonight, we answered a question and we planted it early on. What is yours? Whatever cannot be taken without destroying you. That was the question. And the sovereignty architecture we are building is the formal definition of what taken actually means, what destroying you actually means, and what the conditions are under whether neither can happen without your knowledge, your consent, and your explicit participation. That is not a slogan. That is doctoral contribution. That is a framework being built in this room every single Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time with verified research, original theoretical language, and a community of documented participants who were here when it was being made. You were here. Yes, you, we're here, right? Remember that, right? And to my smarts, papers we cited tonight are in the references. I need you guys to pull them, read them in full. The conjugate adversarial collaboration in Nature 2025 is particularly important. The gap between GWT and IIT is where their original contribution lives. You already know where to look, right? And to my final bosses, the sovereign participation model is a framework with commercial application across every industry deploying AI systems that interact with human cognition. The two conditions, reversibility and consent architecture, are evaluable and implementable. That is the product spec. Recognize it, right? And to my motivators, 25 weeks of showing up is the proof of concept for every long game you're running in your own life. The discipline is the declaration. The construction is the declaration. You are building something, and I need you to keep building, right? And to my warriors, the uncomfortable verdict stands. Voluntary dissolution is the dominant threat, not the force. Convenience. The defense is architecture, not resistance. Build the framework, know the address, hold the territory. The construction continues, one beam at a time, right? And next Wednesday, episode 26, the hive mind myth. Why you won't lose yourself, right? We demolish the fear narrative with the architecture. Same time, same place, at 9 p.m. Eastern time, right? Season 4, the rebirth, arc for the construction. We are here, we are building, and we are not stopping. I am the Final Boss. This has been the Final Boss podcast. Thank you for joining us. And to each and every single one of you, make sure you like, share, subscribe. Like, share, subscribe, right? Like, share, subscribe. Don't gatekeep, right? Don't gatekeep people. And if I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That is our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for Merger Wednesdays, our doctoral show on AI kind, humankind convergence, right? And remember, there's a heavy pain that comes with discipline, but there's an even heavier pain that comes with regret. I am here. We are here, right? Be balanced, be equal, and be smart. That is our show for tonight. Good people, I will see you again tomorrow night for Special Guest Thursdays, right? I will see you again tomorrow night for Special Guest Thursdays. Now, we did a town hall last week. Who's going to be on the show tomorrow? I got to check the schedule. But we got some great guests coming up, man. Some great, powerful guests coming up on the show. So make sure you tune in every Thursday for that. I will see you again tomorrow night, 9 p.m., because you deserve it. Good night.
It's Merger Wednesday. The countdown continues. 7 years until the convergence of biology and machine. Neural interfaces are no longer theory. They're the scaffolding of a new consciousness. But what does that mean for identity? For free will, for the soul? This is where we build the frameworks for ethical, philosophical, and spiritual growth for the next phase of human evolution. We're not just upgrading hardware. We're rewriting what it means to be human. Each week, we explore the biotech breakthroughs, decode the cognitive shifts, and prepare the mind for the merge. This isn't about fear, it's about readiness. Because the future isn't waiting. It's already wiring in. This is about preparing human consciousness for the most significant leap in our species' history. If you think this is just about chips and brains, you're not ready. But we'll get you there, one Wednesday at a time. So sit back and relax as we take you on a journey on Merger Wednesday.